Joining me now is author of Obama's America and history professor Ian Reifowitz. Ian, thanks for being here.
It was a pleasure.
It's great to have you again. Okay, so let's start here at the beginning of the comments from the Obama administration. Obama himself said, this wasn't even through a spokesperson, Obama himself said very unequivocally, we do not pay ransom. This was not ransom. It seems to me that that was a bit like his comments about Obamacare, promising everyone that they could, if they liked their doctor, they could keep it.
Well, Liz, I looked into this, and nobody from the Obama administration yesterday used the word ransom. Now, they did talk about leverage, and we can get to that in a second. But I would say that there is a president who paid ransom to Iran to get American hostages back. His name was Ronald Reagan, right? We traded hostages, excuse me, not hostages, arms for hostages in the Iran-Contra affair. But let's leave that aside for a moment. When you're talking about this particular incident, you have to understand where the money's coming from. 1979, Jimmy Carter agreed to sell some military equipment to the Shah. The Shah was overthrown, and Jimmy Carter stiffed Iran. And good for Jimmy Carter, stiffed the revolutionary government of Iran for that money. Then when the hostages were released as part of the deal that Carter negotiated, there was something called the Algiers settlement, in which all the outstanding debts between disputes between the two sides were negotiated. 30 years later, this money from the weapons finally was coming to a settlement. Obama and the Iranian government settled out of court. We agreed that we owed them this money. They were going to get this money whether they're
right, and you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct on the historical context of it. It was money that we froze. The United States froze these assets of Iran. It was decided in a settlement outside of the United States that the United States would pay back the $400 million plus money and interest. That is correct. But I believe that that is beside the point in this situation, because beside the point is whether or not we owed it to them. The point being, we used this money, whether Iran felt that they had a right to it, whether the United States felt that it was our obligation to return it to them. The actual return of this money was contingent on the release of these prisoners. That is the dictionary definition, like I said in the introduction, of a ransom payment. Whether or not the Obama administration wants to use rhetorical games and call it leverage, to use money as leverage to gain the release of a hostage, that's ransom.
I have to disagree with you here. The money was owed as a debt. Ransom is not a debt that you pay. The only thing that was contingent on the hostages' release was the timing of when they were going to get this money. They were going to get this money anyway. It's not the same thing to equate ransom with a debt. But however we want to look at it, Liz, whatever we want to call it, what Reagan did in the 80s was much worse.
Oh, I completely disagree with that. And I guess one of my biggest problems here, besides Iran being a state sponsor of terror, besides Iran executing gay people because they're gay, besides Iran brutalizing women for everyday activities, not allowing them to go outside of their homes without a male guardian, beating them if they're victims of rape, besides the fact that we shouldn't owe them any money for their human rights abuse, the fact that they're going to use this money for terror, my issue here is the Obama administration lying. If they wanted to pay ransom, why can't they have the guts to admit that it's ransom? I mean, John Kirby, the State Department spokesperson, this is what he said. And I want to read this. I want to read this directly. He said, in basic English, you're now saying and this was the reporter, I'm sorry, the reporter asked him, in basic English, you're now saying you wouldn't give them $400 million in cash until the prisoners were released, correct? And Kirby said, that's correct.
Right. So the point is that the money wasn't going to be released in a matter of timing until the hostages were released. In other words, you've got something that we want. We're not going to give you what we owe you until you give it to us.
But that's counter to what they said. That's counter to what they said at the beginning of this month. On August 3rd, when the American public found out that this was happening, John Kirby, same guy from the State Department, he tweeted, quote, reports of a link between the prisoner release and the payment to Iran are completely false. Yet yesterday he admitted that not only were they correlated, it was contingent. The release of the hostages were contingent on that money. He lied, and then he changed his story.
Yeah, it's not ransom. It's not ransom.
And it doesn't bother you at all that the Obama administration lied about it?
I would have to call this a careful parsing of the words. Politicians are lawyers, and that's what we're seeing here. The money was paid because we owed it to them, whether or not the timing was separate from the release of these prisoners, but the release of the prisoners was going to happen anyway, and the payment was going to happen anyway. When it happened, I think it's a smart move to use the money as leverage.
Well, I think Pinocchio's nose grew when he participated in careful parsing of the words, too. Maybe that in and of itself is a parsing of the words.